"You're going to sign this tonight." My father said it like he was ordering coffee. I was standing behind the counter of Harbor Street Cafe, wiping down a ceramic mug, when the bell above the door rang and 3 people I hadn't seen in 5 years walked in like they owned the place. My father, my mother, and my younger brother, Cole. The lunch crowd was thinning. Soft jazz played through the speakers. The smell of roasted beans and cinnamon drifted through the room. They chose the table by the window. My best table, the one with the harbor view. No greeting, no hesitation, just my father pulling a folded document from his coat pocket and sliding it across the table. 20%, he said. My brother leaned back in his chair like he was already a partner. My mother didn't even look up from her phone. "You built something nice here," my father continued. "Time for family to benefit." I stayed standing. "What exactly is this?" I asked. "A partnership agreement," he replied. "You sign tonight. Cole gets 20% ownership." "And if I don't?" That's when his smile disappeared. He tapped the paper once. "Then I call your landlord," he said quietly. "I know the man who owns this building. One phone call and your lease becomes very complicated." 5 years of silence, and this was their first conversation. I looked at the contract, then at my brother, then back at my father, and slowly I smiled. Before I tell you why my family disappeared for 5 years, let me ask you something. Where are you watching this from? And what time is it where you are right now? Drop it in the comments. I always find it interesting how these stories travel across different cities and countries. And if you enjoy stories about people being underestimated and then proving everyone wrong, make sure you like the video and subscribe. All right, back to the story. 5 years earlier, I wasn't a cafe owner. I was the family disappointment. My name is Mara Ellison, and growing up in my family meant one thing. Success had a very specific definition: corporate job, predictable income, respectable titles. My younger brother Cole followed that script perfectly. Business school, corporate internship, the future of the family, according to my father. I went in a different direction. At 24, I quit my accounting job and decided to open a small cafe. My father called it a hobby pretending to be a career. "You're throwing your education away," he said during the last family dinner we had together. "It's a business," I replied. "It's a coffee shop," he corrected. My mother sided with him. "You're too smart to waste your life serving lattes." The argument lasted 20 minutes. The silence afterward lasted 5 years. Because when I signed the lease for this place, my father told me something I never forgot. "Don't expect this family to rescue you when it fails." And then they stopped calling. No holidays, no birthdays, no messages, until the day they walked into my cafe with a contract. For 5 years, my family never once asked how the cafe was doing. Not when I opened, not when I worked 16-hour days learning how to run a kitchen and manage staff, not even when Harbor Street Cafe started showing up in local food blogs. But businesses have a way of revealing themselves, especially successful ones. 2 months before they showed up, the City Business Journal published an article about independent cafes expanding across the waterfront district. My cafe was featured. Apparently, that's when my father finally paid attention. Back at the table, my brother Cole tapped the contract with one finger. "You've done well here," he said, looking around the room like he was evaluating real estate. "You built something valuable." I waited. "Which means it's the perfect time to expand," he continued. "Expand how?" I asked. "With partners." My father nodded approvingly. "Cole has a business opportunity," he said, "an investment deal that just needs collateral." Collateral. That word explained everything. My cafe wasn't family anymore. It was leverage. "How much money are we talking about?" I asked. My brother hesitated, then answered. "About $300,000. That wasn't an investment. That was a bailout." I leaned against the counter and looked at the 3 people who hadn't spoken to me in half a decade. "You disappeared for 5 years," I said calmly. "And now you want 20% of my business?" My father folded his hands. "Not want," he corrected. "Need." I picked up the contract. 11 pages, dense legal language, ownership transfer, voting rights, profit distribution. This wasn't something someone wrote in an afternoon. They had planned this. "You brought a lawyer into this?" I asked. "Of course," my father said. He leaned back in his chair, confident. "We came prepared." My brother took a sip of coffee, didn't even ask if he could. My father continued. "You sign tonight, and Cole becomes a silent partner. 20%, no complications." "And if I don't?" I asked again. That's when he said it. "I call your landlord." He spoke the words slowly. "I know Arthur Delgado, the man who owns this building. We served on a committee together years ago." He tapped the table. "One phone call from me, and he starts asking questions about your lease." My mother finally looked up. "You're running a small business," she said softly. "It wouldn't take much to make things difficult." The cafe had gone quiet. Most of the customers had left. The evening light from the harbor stretched across the floor. I looked at my father for a long moment. 5 years ago, that threat might have scared me. Back then, I had nothing. But Harbor Street Cafe wasn't fragile anymore, and there was one detail my father didn't know. Actually, 2 details. I placed the contract back on the table. "You're right," I said calmly. "This is a serious decision." I glanced at the clock on the wall. "Give me 15 minutes." My father smiled. He thought he was winning. I walked into the back office and closed the door. The cafe noise softened to a dull hum through the wall. My laptop was still open on the desk. An email notification blinked in the corner of the screen. Subject line: Lease Transfer Confirmation. I opened it. The message was short. "Ms. Ellison, as discussed, ownership of the Harbor Street property has officially transferred to Harbor District Holdings effective today. All existing tenants remain in place under their current agreements. Thank you again for your partnership. Arthur Delgado." I leaned back in the chair. Arthur Delgado. The same landlord my father had just threatened to call. The problem was, Arthur wasn't just my landlord anymore. 6 months earlier, he had approached me with an opportunity. The waterfront district was expanding, developers were circling, and Arthur wanted to retire. So we made a deal, not just for the cafe, for the entire building. It took months of financing meetings and investor calls, but that morning the paperwork had finally closed. Harbor District Holdings. Majority partner, me. Meaning the person my father planned to pressure was now the person who owned the property. I forwarded the email to my phone, then walked back into the dining room. My family was still at the table, waiting. My father looked pleased with himself. "Ready to be reasonable?" he asked. I sat down, placed my phone on the table, and opened the email. I turned the phone so everyone at the table could see the screen. My father leaned forward slightly. "What is this?" he asked. "An email," I said. My brother glanced down at it first, then leaned closer. My mother adjusted her glasses. None of them spoke for a moment. Finally, my father frowned. "Why are you showing us a lease document?" "It's not a lease document," I replied calmly. "It's a transfer confirmation." "Transfer of what?" "The building." My father blinked. "What do you mean, the building?" "The one we're sitting in." I tapped the screen lightly. "Harbor District Holdings finalized the purchase this morning." Silence settled over the table. My brother looked up. "You bought this building?" "Part of it," I said. My father's face tightened. "That doesn't make sense." "It makes perfect sense." I folded my hands. "You threatened to call my landlord." I paused. "But that's going to be a difficult conversation now." My mother's voice was barely above a whisper. "Why?" "Because my landlord," I added a slight edge, "is my business partner." I let the words settle. "Which means if you want to complain about my lease," I leaned forward slightly, "you'd have to call me." My father stared at the phone. The confidence he walked in with had started to disappear, and for the first time that evening, he looked unsure. The confidence drained out of the room slowly. My father didn't touch the contract anymore. My brother was staring at the table. That's when I asked the question they had been avoiding. "How much did you lose, Cole?" He didn't answer. My father tried instead. "It was an investment setback. How much?" My brother finally spoke. 280,000. The number hung in the air. "That's not a setback," I said. "That's a collapse." He rubbed his hands together nervously. "The investors want their money back." "So the plan," I said slowly, "was to attach 20% of my cafe to your debt?" My father cleared his throat. "It would only be temporary." Temporary. That word gets used a lot when people want access to something that isn't theirs. "And if those investors came after the stake?" I asked. "They wouldn't. You can't guarantee that." My brother didn't look at me, because he knew I was right. What they had asked for wasn't help, it was collateral. My cafe, my business, my building, all of it tied to a debt I didn't create. My father leaned forward again, trying to regain control. "We're still family," he said, "and families help each other." I studied him for a moment. 5 years of silence, one contract, one threat, and suddenly we were family again. I stood up from the table. "No," I said calmly. "You're customers." My father looked up sharply. "What does that mean?" he asked. "It means this is a business," I replied, "and right now you're sitting in it like everyone else." I picked up the contract and slid it back across the table. "I'm not signing anything." My brother finally looked at me. "So that's it?" he asked. "You're just going to watch me drown?" "No," I said. "I'm refusing to drown with you." My father's chair scraped against the floor as he stood. "You owe this family," he snapped. I shook my head. "I built this place without you." That sentence carried 5 years of early mornings, double shifts, supplier negotiations, and loan payments, none of which they had been present for. My mother stood up too. "You've changed," she said quietly. "Yes," I agreed. "People tend to do that when they're left alone long enough." I turned toward the counter and pressed the small service bell. Priya, my floor manager, walked over. "Yes?" I said, "Table 7 is ready for their check." My father stared at me. "You're serious?" "Yes." The receipt printer behind the bar whirred softly. Priya placed the bill on the table. 3 glasses of wine, 1 cheese board. Total, $74. My father didn't move. The entire cafe felt still for a moment. And that's when I said the last thing I needed them to hear. "Next time," I told them, "make a reservation." 6 weeks passed. Harbor Street Cafe kept doing what it had always done. Morning crowds, tourists near the harbor, regulars who ordered the same drink every day. Business didn't collapse after my family's visit. If anything, it improved. Owning part of the building meant I could finally renovate the upstairs space. We turned it into a small private dining room for events. Friday nights were fully booked. Saturday mornings had a line out the door. Meanwhile, my phone stayed quiet. My father never called again. My mother sent one message 3 weeks later. 4 words. "Family should support family." I read it once, then closed the conversation. Because support isn't something you demand with contracts and threats. It's something you build with time. Something my family hadn't invested in for years. A few days later, I heard through a mutual friend that my brother had sold his car to start paying back investors. I didn't feel satisfaction hearing that, just distance. That chapter of my life had already ended. The cafe was busy again that afternoon when I walked through the dining room. The sunlight coming through the harbor windows looked exactly the way I imagined when I first signed the lease 5 years ago, back when everyone thought I was making a mistake. But sometimes the people who disappear from your life are the same people who clear space for it to grow. Looking back, the strangest part wasn't the contract, it was the timing. 5 years of silence, and the moment my business looked successful, my family suddenly remembered my phone number. That told me everything I needed to know. Success has a funny way of attracting people who were never interested in the struggle, the late nights, the empty bank account, the risk. Those years belonged to me alone, but the results? Everyone suddenly wanted a piece. What my father never understood is that a business isn't just numbers on paper. It's time, sacrifice, decisions made when no one is watching. And those things aren't transferable. You can't demand them.
You can't threaten them out of someone. You either help build them or you don't get to claim them later. Harbor Street Cafe is still standing, still busy, still mine. And sometimes, when I pass table 7 by the window, I remember that night. The contract, the threat, the look on my father's face when he realized the power dynamic had changed. Then I keep walking, because the best revenge isn't arguing, it's building something no one else can take from you.